Hi and welcome to day 3 of Trig Graphs. Today we're going to be talking about the trig graphs, and we are going to deal with a negative amplitude. So that just means I have a negative a value. And we've talked about the amplitude, and when we find the a value, we take the absolute value of a. And in this case, the absolute value of a would be 1. And b in this case is 1. And remember, the period is 2 pi divided by b. In this case it's 1, so my period is 2 pi. Is there ones? Looks like chicken scratch, sorry. And the interval is 2 pi divided by 4, which is pi over 2. So let's count by pi over 2's 0, 1 pi over 2, 2 pi over 2, which is pi, 3 pi over 2, and then 4 pi over 2, which is 2 pi. This is sine. The sine of 0 is 0 times negative 1 is 0, because that's just a negative 1 out in front. Pi over 2 is 90. The sine of 90 is 1 times the negative 1 out in front, so it's negative 1. 180 is pi, so the sine of 180 is 0 times negative 1 is 0. 3 pi over 2 is 270. The sine of 270 is negative 1 times the negative 1 out in front is positive 1. 2 pi is 360. The sine of 360 is 0 times negative 1 is 0. So we have 0, 0. Pi over 2 would be negative 1. Pi would be 0. 3 pi over 2 is 1. And then 2 pi is 0. And I need this to go all the way to negative 2 pi. So I'm going to go back through, reflect it through the origin, because that's what sine does. Go up to 1, to 0, to negative 1, and back up to 0. And then connect my points in a nice smooth curve. Try to go through your points better than I did. And label my graph y equals negative sine x. Okay, so now number 2 is just our cosine curve, except our amplitude is negative 1. So my amplitude is 1 because it's the absolute value of negative 1. My b, my frequency is 1. So that means my period is 2 pi divided by b. So my period is 2 pi divided by 1, which is 2 pi. The interval is the period divided by 4, so it's 2 pi divided by 4, which is pi over 2, x and y. Count by pi over 2's is the same as above. 0, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. This is cosine. The cosine of 0 is 1 times the negative 1 that's out in front. I get negative 1. Pi over 2 is 90. The cosine of 90 is 0 times negative 1 is 0. Pi is 180. The cosine of 180 is negative 1 times the negative 1 out in front is positive 1. 3 pi over 2 is 270. The cosine of 270 is 0 times negative 1 is still 0. And 2 pi is 360, so the cosine of 360 is 1 times the negative 1 out in front. You get negative 1. So my graph is going to look like this. Negative 1, and then 0, 1, 0, and negative 1. Here, I'm only going from negative pi to 2 pi, so I'm going to go back up to 0 to the left, and then up to 1, and I'm going to stop there because it tells me to go from negative pi to 2 pi. It's kind of a strange interval, but just kind of trying to see if you're paying attention to what the directions tell you. So, connect your points. And this is y equals negative cosine x. Now, these are just my normal sine and cosine curves, my regular ones where the amplitude is 1. The only difference is it kind of turned the sine and cosine curves inside out, reflected them over the x-axis. Okay? Okay, we can apply the same things here as we did before. Find the amplitude of my function y equals negative 1/2 sine 3x. My amplitude is going to be a positive 1/2. B is my frequency, which is 3. The period is 2 pi divided by 3. And now I have to take 2 pi divided by 3 and divide that whole thing by 4. So that's like saying 2 pi over 12, because this is when I get out my little hammer and knock it on the fraction on top of his head, knock the 3 down below. So 3 times 4 is 12. And then I just need to reduce my fraction to pi over 6. Okay, so I'm going to count by pi over 6. So it's 0, 1 pi over 6, 2 pi over 6, which reduces to pi over 3, 1, 2, 3 pi over 6, which reduces to pi over 2, 4 pi over 6, which reduces to 2 pi over 3. And I really have to stop. I can stop there because that's where the period stops, and after that point I'm going to just repeat myself. So I need to substitute in 0. 0 times 3 is 0. The sine of 0 is 0. Times negative 1/2 is still 0. Pi over 6 is 30 degrees. 3 times 30 is 90. The sine of 90 is 1 times the negative 1/2 is negative 1/2. Pi over 3 is 60. 3 times 60 is 180. The sine of 180 is 0. Times the negative 1/2 is 0. Pi over 2 is 90. The sine of 3 times 90 is 270. The sine of 270 is negative 1 times the negative 1/2 makes it a positive 1/2. 2 pi over 3 is 120 degrees times 3 is 360. The sine of 360 is 0 times the negative 1/2 is 0. So on my graph, I'm graphing from negative pi to pi. So I start at 0, 0. And this is going to be a real skinny little graph. Each of these little lines on my graph is going to be 30 degrees because this would be 30, 60, pi over 2 is 90, and pi over 6 is 30 degrees. So each line I'm going to have a point. And my 1/2 is going to be right up here. So it's 30, and then, oh, except that's supposed to be a negative 1/2, so it's supposed to be down here. Hang on a second. Okay, fix that there. And then at pi over 3, I'm at 0 again. You can see my point. There we go. And then pi over 2, I'm at a positive 1/2. And then at 3 pi over 2, I'm at 0. And I need to continue with this pattern. So I would go over one more and go down to a negative 1/2. And then my next point would be back at 0. And I have to go to negative pi through my origin. So I'm going to go up to 1/2, down to 0, down to negative 1, back up to 0, or negative 1/2 I should say, back up to 0, then go up to 1/2, and then at negative pi be down at 0. So I need to draw my curve. It's harder for me to see this here because it's so small. Sorry guys. Y equals negative 1/2 sine x. Alright, last one. Y equals negative 2 cosine 2x from 0 to 2 pi. So my amplitude is still going to be 2 because the absolute value of negative 2 is 2. My frequency is 2. My period is 2 pi divided by 2, which is just pi. So my interval is pi divided by 4. So 0, 1 pi over 4. 2 pi over 4 is pi over 2. 3 pi over 4. And then 4 pi over 4 is pi, and I can stop because that's where the period stops. This is cosine. So 0. 2 times 0 is 0. The cosine of 0 is 1. Times negative 2 is negative 2. Pi over 4 is 90. 2 times, or sorry, 45. So 2 times 45 is 90. Cosine of 90 is 0. Times negative 2 is 0. Pi over 2 is 90. Times 2 is 180. The cosine of 180 is negative 1. Times the negative 2 makes this a positive 2. 3 pi over 4 is 135. Times 2 is 270. The cosine of 270 is 0. Times negative 2 is 0. And the last one is pi. 2 times pi is 360. The cosine of 360 is 1. Times the negative 2 on front makes it negative 2. I'm only graphing from 0 to 2 pi, so it's just to the right. And I start out at 0, negative 2. And then at pi over 4, it should be halfway between 0 and pi over 2. I have 0. So split the difference there. And then at pi over 2, I'm at positive 2. And at 3 pi over 4, so halfway between pi over 2 and pi, I'm at 0. And then at pi, I'm at negative 2. And I just repeat the pattern. So halfway between, I'm at 0. Then I'm up. Halfway in between, I'm at 0. And then I'm down. So the cosine curve, hopefully yours look prettier than mine do, is y equals negative 2 cosine 2x. Now, when you look at the graph, your amplitude is 2, so your height should be 2, and you should see two cosine curves between 0 and 2 pi, remember, because that's what the frequency means. And it looks like it's inside out because your amplitude, or your a value, is negative. Let's go back and look at our other graph here. Looking at the equation, y equals negative 1/2 sine 3x. Well, between 0 and 2 pi, I should have 3 sine curves, and you can see I'm on my way to having 3 sine curves, because at 0 I have one full sine curve and then half of another one. And my amplitude is 1/2 because that's what the height of my graph is. So remember the equations, oh, this should be a 3x here, tell the story of what your graph looks like. So be careful when you are graphing.